Nobody ever said cars were cheap. You might be able to buy a secondhand runaround for $100 or so, but if you want a quality car that's going to last you a while, you'll need to put down a large payment. That usually gives you an incentive to look after your car, but not everybody treats their vehicles with respect. That's why rare and expensive cars sometimes become abandoned, like the poor forgotten examples you're about to see in this video. This sad, rusting vehicle, propped up on steel beams, looks like it may have once been a roller coaster car, but it's actually an experimental hovercraft created in 1958 by New Jersey's Curtiss-Wright Corporation. Back in the 1950s, there was a widespread belief that hovercrafts would replace the automobile in the not-too-distant future, and so the invention of this machine was an attempt to get ahead of the trend. Obviously, as we're still driving cars today, the future didn't turn out the way that Curtiss-Wright imagined that it would. The company had a fine track record of building aircraft, so they had a little difficulty creating this smaller vehicle, which they hoped may attract attention from the military. Two vertically mounted aircraft engines provided the vehicle with lift, and a top speed of 30 miles an hour over both land and water was demonstrated in tests. The military passed on the idea, and this relic of a bygone era was last seen for sale on eBay with an asking price of $100,000. In January 2020, antique car enthusiasts all over the world got very excited about the discovery of an original 1929 Plymouth Model U in a barn in Winnipeg, Canada. It's not the only example of the 91-year-old car in the world, but finding one that still has its original paint and interior fixtures is extremely rare. Apparently, it spent the majority of the past 35 years under a cover in the barn it was found inside, although the person offering it for sale claims that it's still in full working order and was last taken out for a brief drive session 7 years ago. This was one of Plymouth's earliest models, released in only the second year of the company's existence. It was marketed as a budget car, but was the first reliable, low-price model to offer four-wheel hydraulic brakes that made it both popular and practical among the buyers of the time. Under the hood is a 45-horsepower inline-4 engine that looks a little rusty, but should be an easy maintenance job for someone with skilled hands. The seller only wanted $18,000 for it, which strikes us as a bargain. Forgotten old barns are always a good place to go looking for classic cars, especially barns that nobody's been inside for a very long time. It was a barn in Wales in the United Kingdom that gave up this stunning 1954 Jaguar XJ120 in November 2019. Amazingly, this beautiful car had been sitting inside, waiting for someone to come and show it some love and attention for more than 50 years. It was bought in the mid-1960s as a restoration project, but the restoration work barely even got started. That might be a blessing more than it is a curse, because very little work was done on it. It still has its original engine and chassis. Only 151 models of this rare variant, defined by its fixed head and right-hand drive, were ever built. Of that number, the whereabouts of only 57 are currently known. The rest are assumed to have been scrapped or destroyed. The restoration work would have been finished before this old Jaguar could be driven away, but a suggested price of $30,000 surely makes it an attractive investment proposition for somebody. You might not be able to drive a Dragster to and from work on your everyday commute, but Dragsters still count as cars, and so we're happy to feature this spectacular example in our video. It was in a sorry state when it was found in what looks like a greenhouse next to an abandoned shop in 2012. The paintwork was coated in rust and plants were growing both around it and through it. Fortunately, the person who found it was prepared to put in the necessary work to get back to looking its best again. 2 years later, after a long restoration project, the old Dragster arrived at the Portland Roadster Show looking much more like its old self, and it turned a lot of heads. Sadly, we're unable to say who raced the car or when it raced, so what do you think? Let us know in the comments section. Once upon a time, the Bugatti Veyron was the most luxurious and desirable car in the world. It's been overtaken as a luxury car since then, not least because of subsequent Bugatti builds, But a well-cared-for Veyron can still fetch more than $1 million on the open market. That makes it totally mystifying that somebody chose to abandon this one in an underground car park in Moscow. These images come from July 2019, but from the thickness of the dust on the vehicle, it's obvious that it's been there a lot longer than that. One story we've heard says that it was bought in Astrakhan in 2013 and driven to Moscow by its owner, but the owner then went abroad on business and for some reason never returned. The parking space is paid for, so nothing can be done to remove the vehicle, and it isn't listed for sale anywhere. Does that mean it'll sit here forever, slowly rotting away and losing value? We hope not. This is an amazing car that deserves a far better fate than that. Our next rare abandoned car discovery is not just one vehicle, but a whole collection of them that were found together in a barn in Minnesota, USA in mid-2019. Whoever owned the barn must have had a serious love for Pontiac Firebirds. There are 9 cars in the collection, including 4 Super Duty cars, 1 Formula 500, and a drag variant that might even be a one-of-a-kind unique model. 8 of the cars were quickly cleaned up and presented for sale by a company called Restore a Muscle Car LLC based in Lancaster County, Nebraska, but one 5-speed Trans Am was held back for a little more care and attention and is expected to go on sale later in 2020. Not every single one of the 9 Firebirds is rare and valuable. One of them may only be worth a couple of $100s, but finding 9 of them in a group like this doesn't happen every day. And the more desirable models may be worth up to $20,000 each. A very strange story about a limousine parked in Brooklyn, New York, USA, gathered a little press attention in October 2018. Limousines are literally built for luxury. They're impractical to drive, so their only purpose is to make the people riding inside them look very important. There was nothing glamorous about this white stretch, though. While it may have looked impressive from a distance, if you got closer to it and looked through the windows, you'd see the interior was piled high with trash and detritus. Some people who walked past it every day even claimed that there was somebody living inside it. It's fair to say the old limo has seen better days. Some of the windows were cracked, the once plush seats were coated with plastic, and the smell of decaying food it gave off could allegedly be smelled from a block away. Eventually, the police came to claim it on the grounds that it was parked on the road without license plates. Hopefully, it's now in the hands of someone who can restore it and make it look beautiful again, although they might need to fumigate it before they start looking at the windows and paintwork. When the fire department was called out to deal with a car stuck on a beach in Mattapoisett, Massachusetts, USA in March 2019, they thought they were attending the scene of an accident. When they got there, though, they found nobody in danger at all. It was just a black Maserati stuck on the shoreline close to Ned's Point Lighthouse, partially frozen, with no owner in sight. Had they not been called out, it's likely the car would have been claimed by the rising tide in a small number of hours. Having rescued the car, which would have been cheap to acquire for whoever owned it, they were left with a mystery to solve. The doors were open and there were signs of damage to the front fender, so it's likely that the car had recently been involved in an accident. Had somebody dumped their expensive vehicle and run away instead of facing up to their part of the accident? The fire department decided it was a matter for the police to decide and handed the car over to them. If there's somebody out there missing their Maserati, now you know where to find it. The 1930s were a time of great innovation in the field of manufacturing cars. Car building companies had begun to come up against the limitations of box-shaped vehicles when it came to improving top speed and performance, and so experimentation with more streamlined shapes began. Chrysler tried a couple of streamlined models in the middle of the decade, but their unconventional shapes didn't capture the imagination of the public. The 1939 Lincoln Zephyr Coupe, however, did so in a big way. And here's a completely intact original model of the car that turned up in Dumfries, Virginia, USA in September 2018. The owner of the car was offering it for sale for a mere $7,000 and explained that it had remained free of rust because it spent the bulk of the last 75 years indoors. Despite that, it has a few minor issues. The Zephyr badges are missing, and the taillight and headlight lenses are also gone. They would be hard to replace, but not impossible for a dedicated and determined collector. Amazingly, the original 110 horsepower V12 engine still turns over, although it'll take some tweaks to get it into running condition. When it comes to scarcity among vehicles, things don't get much rarer than a car that was literally built as a one-of-a-kind. That's the description that applies to this mid-engined BMW M1. It was built for and adapted by Harold Ertl, a racing driver and journalist, for his attempt to break the world speed record for a vehicle driving on liquefied gas. Ertl and his unique car were successful in that endeavor. The car clocked 192.9 miles an hour on Volkswagen's Era-Lesson test track in October 1981. Ertl had a little financial help when it came to building his car. British Petroleum covered the costs of the record attempt because they wanted to use it to promote their new Autogas brand. There are two KKK K26 turbochargers under the hood, and the M88 inline-6 engine has been adapted to run on the rare type of fuel. In the process, the car's horsepower increased from 280 to somewhere between 400 and 500. After the record was set, the car was sold into private ownership and was in possession of the Batilla family from 1993 until April 2019, when it was passed to a British auction company to be sold to the highest bidder. If you ever find an old abandoned classic car, your first instinct might be to restore it to give yourself the best possible chance of getting a great price for it at auction. Sometimes the best route is to resist that impulse and allow it to be sold exactly as it is. Not a single piece of work was performed on this 1969 Lamborghini Maria P400S after it was found in a barn in Germany in 2019. That didn't stop it selling for a fantastic price of $1.6 million. The vintage Raging Bull chassis number 4245 has only ever had two registered owners. The second of those owners was a reclusive German millionaire who's thought to have driven it regularly until he passed away in 2015. After his passing, the car was forgotten about and only came to light when his relatives finally got around to clearing out his old property 4 years later. If he was driving it regularly, he couldn't have been driving it very far. The auction house who sold it noted there were only 18,000 miles on the vehicle's odometer. We saw an abandoned Bugatti Veyron a little earlier on in this video, but here's another abandoned Bugatti vehicle that comes from much earlier in the company's timeline. It's a Bugatti Type 57S Adelante from 1937, and it's one of only 17 that were ever built. In terms of its speed, it was light years ahead of its time. This early supercar was capable of 130 miles per hour during an era where the majority of cars struggled to get up to even half that speed. Very few people would have been able to buy a car this rare and advanced, so it's no surprise to find out that its first owner was British racer and aristocrat Earl Howe. Howe sold it to a very wealthy doctor who drove it for a while but parked it up in his garage in England in 1960 and never used it again. He also never mentioned it to his family. It wasn't until 2009, several years after the doctor had passed away, that his family finally discovered this priceless heirloom. When it went to auction, it sold for more than $4 million. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.